that our lawyers finish by Friday." Dante said it without looking at either of us, his gaze fixed on the obscenely large watch on his wrist. It was 4:48 in the afternoon, and our time was almost up. The words landed in the sterile air of my rented office, another failed session measured out in billable minutes. "And that the forensic accountants flagged the Cayman transfer he made Tuesday," Anika Jinbei added. Her voice was soft, but it carried a cold weight that made Dante's jaw tighten. She sat perfectly still, a picture of calculated fragility in her severe business suit, her hands folded in her lap. Her purse, a sturdy leather satchel that looked more like a go-bag than a fashion accessory, sat on the floor beside her chair. She had come directly from a meeting with her lawyer, a fact she'd made sure to mention. The court deadline for their discovery phase was tomorrow. I felt the familiar exhaustion settle deep in my bones. For an hour, I had tried to guide them through the wreckage of their marriage, using the very techniques I'd outlined in my book. The book that now felt like a work of fiction. Dante measured the world in transactions, and Anika moved through it like a ghost planning a quiet escape. They were not a couple seeking resolution. They were two warring nations negotiating the terms of a ceasefire, and I was the useless UN observer. A bitter image of Mark Atkinson, my old mentor, flashed in my mind. The Atkinsons had sat in my old office, just like this, smiling for the cameras one day and ending up a murder, suicide the next. My public failure. My private ruin. Atkinson would have looked at this couple and seen an opportunity. He would not have tried to fix them. He would have just blackmailed them both. I closed my notepad, the gesture a small surrender. Just as I was about to officially call the time, a sound from the city below cut through the 50 floors of soundproofed glass. It was a single screech of tires, long and unnatural, a note of panic held for too long. Then another screech joined it, followed by a discordant chorus of car alarms. The noise grew, a wave of metallic chaos washing over the usual late afternoon traffic sounds. Dante let out an annoyed sigh and stood up, striding to the massive panoramic window that made up the far wall. "Amateur hour down there," he muttered. Anika and I followed him to the glass. The scene below was wrong. A pileup clogged the intersection, but it was the people that made my breath catch. They swarmed idling cars, dragging drivers from their seats. A man in a business suit was on the ground, and 3 others were on top of him, their movements frantic and horrifically violent. It was not a riot. It was a feeding frenzy. Sirens started to wail, dozens of them, their overlapping cries weaving into the fabric of screams that were now audible even from here. Dante's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his expression of annoyance shifting to confusion. "It's my driver." He answered the call and put it to his ear. His face went pale. I could hear a wet, choked sound from the phone, then a thin scream that was cut short. Dante stared at the silent phone in his hand. Anika moved quickly to the intercom on the wall. "Concierge," she said, her voice steady. The speaker crackled with a burst of static and unintelligible shouting, a man's voice screaming something about the lobby before the line went dead. Then the lights went out. We were plunged into a moment of absolute darkness and profound silence. The city's noise was gone, the building's systems were gone, and all that was left was the sound of our own breathing in the black. A split second later, the emergency lights flickered on. They cast a weak, blood-red glow over the room, bathing their shocked faces in an alien light. The world outside was severed. Our legal battles and Cayman accounts were meaningless. We were trapped. Dante recovered first, his instinct for control kicking in. He turned from the window, his face a mask of grim authority in the red gloom. "Anika, building schematics now. You have them on that tablet." He pointed a thick finger at her. "Nateb, check the emergency closet in the kitchenette. Look for a first aid kit, water, anything." He was treating a cataclysm like a hostile merger, barking orders to reassert his dominance. Anika ignored him completely. She had already retrieved the heavy-duty tablet from her briefcase and was swiping furiously at the screen, her face illuminated by its cold blue light. "The building's internal network is down," she said to no one in particular. "I'm trying to find a cached version." "Did you hear me?" Dante's voice rose, a sharp edge of anger cutting through his forced calm. "We need a plan." "You need to give orders," Anika shot back, not looking up from her screen. "I need to survive." Their shouting escalated, their old resentments finding new life in the terrifying silence of the 50th floor. I saw my own death in their division. Their loud, angry voices were a dinner bell in a world that had suddenly gone quiet. I stepped between them, my own fear, a cold knot in my stomach. My voice was low and urgent, not an act of dominance but of pure de-escalation. "Stop." They both fell silent, turning to look at me. The gaunt, failed therapist in the tweed jacket that was a size too big. My professional mask was gone, replaced by something colder, something born of the certainty that I would be the first to die. "Your commands will get us killed," I said, looking at Dante. "And your solo escape plan is a coffin." I turned my eyes to Anika. I held their gazes, one after the other. I am the weakest person in this room, so my survival is paramount. This session is not over. It is now about keeping me alive. To do that, you will stop shouting, and you will do exactly as I say. We use the desk. It's marble and weighs a ton, so nothing is getting through it. Dante pointed at the massive slab of polished stone in the reception area, his voice leaving no room for discussion. Faint, rhythmic thuds echoed from the hallway beyond our suite's glass doors. Anika stood with her arms crossed, her expression a flat mask of contempt. She shook her head once. "And block our only way out? That's not security, it's a tomb." "It's the only thing heavy enough," Dante countered, his jaw tight. I saw my own death in their argument. They were not fighting about a desk. They were fighting about who would be in charge when the world ended. I stepped between them, my hands raised in a gesture I had used 1,000 times to de-escalate marital spats. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Let's try a small exercise. Dante, you need to feel secure in your space. You need control. Anika, you need to know there is a viable escape route. You need options. The conflict isn't the desk. It is about control versus options." They both stared at me, their mutual hatred briefly redirected. I pointed to the heavy leather chairs and the low credenza in the waiting area. "We use those. We can wedge them against the door handles, create a barrier that is difficult to breach but one we can dismantle if we need to leave. It satisfies both needs." Silence stretched. The thudding in the hall stopped. Then, with a curt nod, Anika moved toward a chair. Dante watched her for a moment before grabbing the other one. As he pushed the dusty credenza into place, he flinched, pulling his hand back and wiping it on his suit trousers with a look of revulsion. Anika saw it. Her eyes narrowed just for a second, a flicker of calculation in their depths, before her face went blank again. They worked without speaking, the scrape of furniture on the floor, the only sound. We had our barricade. It was our first victory. With the immediate threat handled, a new one settled in. The kitchenette had a water cooler that was nearly empty and a snack machine with a few bags of chips. It was not enough. Anika retrieved a heavy tablet from her briefcase, her fingers flying across the screen. "I have the building schematics," she announced to the room. "There's only one viable location for long-term survival." She turned the tablet around. It showed a 3-level floor plan for the 52nd floor, the penthouse. It had its own water filtration, its own air supply, and reinforced doors. Dante allowed a small, smug smile. "My apartment, the safest place in the city." He reached into his briefcase, his fingers finding a hidden seam in the lining. He pulled out a strange, flat key made of a dark metal. "Of course, it's useless to you. The door has a dual lock system. This is one key." He held it up like a trophy, his ultimate piece of leverage. Anika watched him without a word. She reached into her own purse and pulled out a matching key. "When I was planning to leave you," she said, her voice like ice, "I made a copy. This is the other." The two keys glinted in the emergency lighting. They were our salvation, and they were a perfect symbol of the prison they had built for each other. We could only survive together. My therapy session suddenly had the clearest possible stakes. We decided to search Dante's corner office for a first aid kit. The silence on our floor was now a living thing. heavy and watchful. We had all seen the things on the street. Some were screaming and running, but others were quiet, still, until something moved. "A trust exercise, Nateb," Dante said, gesturing to his office door. "You go first." He wanted to assert his dominance, to make me the scout. I wanted to refuse, but my theory demanded cooperation, and this was the price of his. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the gloom. The huge panoramic window was a black mirror reflecting the dim red emergency light. I moved toward his desk, my shoes silent on the thick carpet. I saw the white and red box of the first aid kit on a shelf. As my fingers touched the plastic, I saw a pair of men's dress shoes under the desk. A shape exploded from the shadows, a low guttural noise tearing from its throat. I scrambled backward, falling over an office chair and kicking it into the creature's path. It stumbled, giving me a moment. All my training, all my theories about human behavior evaporated in a flood of pure terror. My mind was blank. My body acted. I grabbed a heavy crystal award from a shelf, a monument to some forgotten deal, and hurled it with all my strength at the window. The glass did not just break. It detonated in a shower of glittering fragments. A sudden roar of wind filled the office, pulling at papers and blinds. The creature, the lurker, turned toward the sound, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. That was all the time I needed. I scrambled out of the office and slammed the door shut, the latch clicking into place. I leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the frantic scrabbling on the other side. My mind was eerily clear. Analysis is death. Theory is a grave. Only action matters. The sound of the lurker scratching at the door was a constant reminder of how close I had come. The other sound, the splintering wood from the stairwell door, was getting louder. I knew their shared history was a poison that would kill us faster than any monster. I had to drain it. "We need to talk," I said, forcing them to sit in the waiting area. "Our resentments are a liability. We have to know what the absolute worst is." I started with myself, the ultimate therapeutic bait. My career ended because of a couple named Atkinson. I told a magazine they were a success story, my validation of the cooperative contract. Days later, Mark Atkinson killed his wife and then himself. I was ruined. My life's work became a joke that got people killed. The confession lay in the cold air. Dante looked at me with his usual dismissive judgment. Everyone has a sob story. He then turned to Anika. "You want the worst? I've known about your secret escape fund for 2 years. Every transfer, every shell corporation. I just let you think you were being clever. It was more useful to me as leverage." Anika's composure finally broke. Her face was a mask of white rage. "That fund," she spat, her voice shaking, "was for me to get away after your hostile takeover bankrupted my father. The stress of watching you tear apart his life's work gave him the heart attack that killed him. The hatred between them was so raw, it felt like a physical force in the room. This was it. This was the bottom. I had a complete map of their pain, their fears, their deepest reasons to betray one another. I had the weapons I needed to force them to survive." A loud crack echoed from the hallway, louder than any before. The stairwell door splintered, bursting inward. A man in a security guard's uniform scrambled through the opening, his eyes wide with terror. He was halfway across the floor before something unseen grabbed him from the darkness of the stairwell and violently pulled him back. He screamed once. Through the broken door, another figure slipped out. It was a lurker, silent and hunched, its head turning slowly as it surveyed the new space. Our fragile alliance shattered. Dante shoved a rolling drink cart toward his office, trying to open the door and pit the two infected against each other to create a diversion for himself. At the same moment, Anika broke for the bathrooms, her only thought to lock herself inside. The new lurker, drawn by the motion, changed course and moved to intercept her. In the chaos, Dante stumbled and fell. His hand, thrown out to catch his fall, landed squarely in a wet, dark smear on the carpet left by the security guard. He froze, his eyes locked on the blood coating his hand. All the aggression, all the control, drained from his face, replaced by a vacant, catatonic horror. The lurker closed in on Anika, who was trapped now, her back against the wall. I watched it all happen, a spectator at the end of my own world. Dante was paralyzed. Anika was about to die. My plan, my desperate attempt to use my life's work to keep us alive, had crumbled into nothing. My methods were not just a lie, they were a lethal one. I had failed. The world ended in the space between one thought and the next. One moment my mind was a catalog of failure, the next it was empty. The lurker lunged toward Anika, its movements silent and wrong, and the theories that had defined my life dissolved into useless noise. Cold clarity cut through my despair. I was no longer a therapist, no longer the author of a book, no longer a man haunted by ghosts. I was just a body that wanted to live. I stopped thinking and I acted. My hand found the cold metal of the fire extinguisher on the wall, lifting it free from its bracket. The weight was unfamiliar and absolute. With a guttural roar that came from some primal part of me I thought was long dead, I swung the steel canister into the side of the lurker's head. There was a wet, solid crack. It stumbled, and I struck it again, and then again, until it lay still on the floor. I stood over the body, my breath tearing in and out of my lungs. Dark fluid was splattered across the worn tweed of my jacket. I turned to look at the others. Anika was pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with shock. Dante was still on the floor, a whimpering wreck staring at his own bloody hand. My voice came out flat, stripped of empathy. "Get up." Dante did not move. "We are going to the penthouse, now." I gave the order and the tone left no room for negotiation. This was not a session anymore. Anika pushed herself off the wall, her gaze fixed on me, analytical as ever, but with a new layer of caution. She understood the change. She walked over to Dante and pulled him roughly to his feet. He followed numbly, his terror making him compliant. The time for cooperation was over. Now there was only command. The emergency stairwell was a concrete throat leading up into darkness. The air was stale, smelling of dust and something metallic. The only light came from the red emergency fixtures, casting long shadows that writhed with every step we took. The stairs were littered with discarded office trash and papers. I went first, the heavy extinguisher held ready. I had given Anika the smaller, sharper letter opener from Dante's desk. Dante had nothing. His fear was his only weapon, and I used it. I pushed him forward at every landing to check the corners, his panicked rage a useful battering ram against the unknown. I used Anika's sharp eyes and her gift for pattern recognition to spot anything out of place, any shadow that was too deep. They were no longer my clients. They were components in a machine of survival, and I was its operator. We were near the top, on the landing for the 51st floor, when Dante's nerve finally broke completely. A heavy, overturned gurney blocked part of the stairs. He shoved it aside with a frantic curse, the metal legs scraping loudly against the concrete. The sound was a mistake. The gurney slid farther than he intended, exposing the open space behind Anika. A figure lunged from the deep shadows of the landing below. It was one of the flashed, its eyes vacant, its mouth open in a silent snarl. It moved faster than the lurker had. Before I could even shout a warning, it seized Anika's forearm, its teeth sinking into her flesh. She smothered a cry, a pained gasp that was cut short. With a surge of adrenaline, she drove the letter opener into the creature's neck. It shuddered and fell back, tumbling down the stairs into the darkness. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, clutching her arm to her chest. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice still flat. She nodded, keeping her arm hidden in the folds of her ruined blazer. "It just scratched me." Dante was already scrambling up the last flight of stairs, desperate to get away. I knew she was lying, but there was no time. We followed him. She had minutes. The hallway outside the penthouse was clean and quiet, a different world from the stairwell. The walls were covered in dark, expensive fabric, and the floor was polished stone that reflected the dim emergency lights. The penthouse door was a slab of thick steel set into the wall. It had two heavy key locks set far apart. This was the end of the game. Anika began her final play. She stumbled forward, leaning against the wall, and let out a choked sob. It was a perfect performance of a breakdown. "I can't," she gasped, her eyes finding Dante's. "You were going to leave me back there? You pushed that gurney to clear a path for yourself." Dante looked at her with disgust. "Get it together, Anika. This isn't one of Nateb's sessions." "You would have left me to die," she insisted, her voice rising with a frantic edge that was not entirely an act. "I would have," he said without hesitation. That was all she needed. With a scream of pure rage, she lunged. It was not an attack. It was a precise, calculated action. She slammed her body into his, using his larger mass and momentum to drive him backward against the unmoving steel door. The impact knocked the wind out of him. In that single, fluid motion, she jammed his key, which he was holding in a white-knuckled grip, toward one lock. At the same instant, she drove her own key from her pocket into the other, with her scream turning into a raw agony that was both performance and the horrifying truth of the infection taking hold. She turned both keys in their locks. The heavy deadbolts retracted with a deafening series of metallic clunks. The door was open. In the split second that followed, I saw it all. I understood her sacrifice, the final, brilliant move in a war he never knew she was fighting so masterfully. I did not hesitate. I shoved the stunned Dante through the doorway and into the dark apartment. Anika turned back, her face a mask of agony, rage, and a flicker of triumphant freedom. The first violent seizure shook her body. I slammed the heavy steel door. The locks engaged automatically with a final booming thud. Silence. We were inside. We were safe. The only sound in the vast, dark space was Dante's ragged, hitching sobs. I surveyed our sanctuary. It was a monument of cold, useless luxury, all black marble and glass. Dante, his mind finally shattered by the trauma and the proximity of Anika's transformation, slid down the wall to the floor. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horrified accusation that was almost childlike. "What did you make us do?" he whimpered. I looked past him, at my own reflection in the polished black stone of the entryway. I saw a gaunt man in a torn and blood-spattered tweed jacket. My face was dirty, and my eyes were sunken hollows, but they were clear. I had my answer. I had succeeded. I had retroactively justified my life's work, not by healing a relationship, but by manipulating its toxicity to its ultimate violent conclusion. I had atoned for my professional failure by sacrificing my humanity. I turned back to the broken man sobbing on the floor of his new cage and spoke the cold, undeniable truth of my new philosophy. I made us cooperate.